Deep in the mountains of Western Virginia, where fog weaves between ancient pines and time feels frozen in the 1920s, lies a place America has tried to forget. Odd, a small rural community in the Appalachians, has become synonymous with a taboo that modern society condemns absolutely: generations of marriage between direct relatives. The dirt road leading to the Whitaker family's property is narrow and rough, lined with rusty trailers and wooden houses that defy gravity. GPS signals die kilometers before you arrive. It's as if technology itself rejects this place's existence. In 2020, photographer and documentary filmmaker Mark Leiter journeyed into these hills with a camera and a burning question on his mind. How can one family survive decades of consanguineous marriage? What he discovered was a reality beyond fiction. The Whitakers are not just an isolated case of inbreeding. They are the extreme outcome of generations of geographical isolation, deep poverty, and traditions upheld for over a century. Ray, Lorraine, Timmy, and Freddie Whitaker are siblings who carry in their bodies and minds the scars of a gene pool turned in on itself. Ray, the eldest, has severe physical deformities. His head is unusually small compared to his body, a condition known as microcephaly. He communicates through grunts and gestures. His intellectual capacity is profoundly limited. Lorraine, the only sister, has clear facial deformities and motor challenges that affect her walk. Timmy can speak a few words but lives with major intellectual disability. His face shows the unmistakable marks of inbreeding: asymmetry, serious dental issues, and a distant gaze that speaks of lifelong isolation. Freddie, the youngest, is the only one who can hold basic conversations. Yet even he shows clear signs of cognitive impairment. What's most unsettling isn't just their appearance, it's how naturally they accept their condition. This is the only reality they've ever known. There are no mirrors in their home. No television showing other families. No outside reference to make them understand how different they are. The house they live in is a cluster of rooms with no electric light, no running water, no modern comforts. The smell of mold and neglect clings to every corner. Piles of years-old trash form small mountains in the backyard. It's hard to tell where the garbage ends and their belongings begin. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because this is one of the most extreme and well-documented stories of consanguinity in the United States, and you won't find details like these anywhere else. To grasp how the Whitakers reached this point, we must go back to the 19th century, when the first settlers made homes in the isolated mountains of Western Virginia. Appalachia has always been defined by extreme geographical isolation. Communities formed in deep valleys walled in by steep mountains and kilometers of dense forest. The terrain here is brutal and unyielding. Mountains shooting up over 1,200 meters create narrow, cut-off valleys where small communities developed their own culture, language, and traditions over generations. Winter snows can seal these communities off for months, forcing families to rely only on themselves. Dr. Spencer Wells, a geneticist who studies isolated populations, explains that when small groups are geographically cut off for generations, the gene pool shrinks. What happened in the Appalachians is a classic case of genetic drift in small founder populations, Wells noted in his 2018 research in the Journal of Medical Genetics. He goes on to explain the population bottleneck effect. When a group shrinks and stays isolated, it loses genetic diversity, creating a cycle that leads to unavoidable inbreeding. The recorded history of Appalachia is filled with similar examples. During colonial times, whole families moved into remote valleys seeking independence and isolation from the federal government. Many brought old European traditions with them, including marriage customs already seen as problematic back then. The Whitaker family's roots in the region trace back to 1887, when John Whitaker settled in Odd with his wife Sarah. U.S. Census records show that by the second generation, marriages between first cousins had started. By the third generation, marriages between siblings and half-siblings had become routine not by preference, but from a total lack of options. Archives from the local Methodist church, kept in Charleston's historical library, include troubling details about how these unions were formally blessed. Reverend Samuel Morrison, who served the community from 1920 to 1945, kept careful records of baptisms, weddings, and funerals. His personal diaries, uncovered in 2019, include passages that show his growing unease with the irregular marriages he was asked to perform. In one entry from June 23, 1934, Morrison wrote, "Today I wed Mary Whitaker to her own brother, Henry. The girl is just 16 and already shows signs of mental struggle. Henry is little better. Both are children of a union between father and daughter. God have mercy." Entries like this continue for years, documenting increasingly troubling marriages. Morrison recorded at least 12 unions between first-degree relatives in the Whitaker family between 1930 and 1940. Each entry reveals his growing distress and his powerlessness against a tradition that continued with or without his approval. The isolation wasn't just geographical. It was also cultural, religious, and economic. The Whitakers belonged to a fundamentalist sect that viewed the outside world as sinful and corrupt. Marrying outside the family wasn't just difficult, it was seen as disloyal to family and faith. This group, known locally as the Church of the Elect, developed a theology that justified and even encouraged consanguineous marriage. Handwritten sermons found on the Whitaker property interpret Bible passages as commands to keep the bloodline pure. The genetic consequences became obvious by the fourth generation. Medical records from Charleston General Hospital, obtained through public records requests, show that between 1920 and 1950, at least 15 Whitaker children were born with severe disabilities. 8 died before turning 5. Prolonged inbreeding leads to what geneticists call inbreeding depression. Harmful recessive genes that usually stay dormant when people marry genetically distant partners become active when both parents carry the same mutations. In the Whitakers' case, genetic analysis by Dr. Michael Bamshad of the University of Washington revealed that the current siblings have an inbreeding coefficient of 0.355, meaning they are genetically closer than regular siblings born to the same parents. This suggests their own parents were the products of multiple generations of close-kin marriage. To give perspective, Dr. Bamshad explains, an inbreeding coefficient of 0.375 is extremely rare. For comparison, the children of siblings would have a coefficient of 0.25. What we see in the Whitakers suggests at least 3 straight generations of very close-kin reproduction. This level of inbreeding results in what geneticists term extreme homozygosity, a condition where nearly all harmful recessive genes are expressed at once. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a medical geneticist at Johns Hopkins who studied the Whitaker case, describes it as a perfect example of the worst-case scenario in human genetics. Martinez continues, "What we see in the Whitakers is essentially the human equivalent of a highly inbred lab strain. They've accumulated so many deleterious mutations that it's a miracle they survived to adulthood. Their immune systems, neurological development, bone structure, and heart function are all compromised by this extreme genetic load." Detailed genetic testing showed the Whitaker siblings carry at least 23 different recessive mutations in homozygous form, all active at once. In a normal population, the chance of one person carrying even 5 of these expressed mutations is astronomically low. The Whitakers represent a statistically impossible convergence of adverse genetic factors. The physical deformities are only the surface. They also suffer from congenital heart conditions, partial deafness, chronic kidney issues, and severely weakened immune systems. Ray has severe epilepsy with seizures that can last hours. Lorraine has respiratory problems that leave her constantly short of breath. Perhaps the most tragic part is that these 4 siblings are the survivors. Church documents indicate at least 7 other siblings were stillborn or died in childhood from conditions too severe for life. The 4 who lived are, paradoxically, the least affected cases of a genetic line that should have ended long ago. The persistence of inbreeding in the Whitaker family isn't just about individual choice. It's the result of a complex system of isolation, poverty, and ignorance that has reinforced itself for over a century. Betty Whitaker, a distant cousin who left the community in the 1970s, offers a shocking look inside the family's dynamics. "No one explained anything," she told filmmaker Mark Leiter. "Girls got pregnant by their brothers, fathers, or uncles, and that was normal. There was no sex ed. No knowledge of genetics. No alternatives." Betty, now 73 and living in a nursing home in Charleston, carries her own physical and emotional scars from life on the Whitaker property. She has mild finger deformities and slight facial asymmetry, signs that she, too, is a product of inbreeding, though far less severe than her cousins. I was considered the normal one in the family, Betty recalls bitterly. Because I could read a few words and do simple math, it gave me the courage to escape when I was 19. I walked 15 kilometers down the mountain until I reached the main road, where a truck driver picked me up to Charleston. Betty describes disturbing family rituals that show how inbreeding was formalized within the family. There was a ceremony called the Blessing of Purity when a girl turned 14. The family patriarch, old Thomas Whitaker in my time, would choose which male relative would be that girl's guardian. It didn't matter if it was her father, brother, uncle, or cousin. The girl had no say. These guardians had exclusive reproductive rights over the women assigned to them. Betty says resisting meant severe punishment, being locked in a dark basement, deprived of food, or beaten badly. My younger sister Rebecca tried to escape 3 times, Betty remembers, tearing up. The 3rd time, they broke her legs with a hammer so she couldn't walk far enough to get away. She died at 23, giving birth to her 5th child. All 5 were from our own father. Betty describes an environment where incest wasn't just accepted, it was encouraged by family leaders as a way to keep the bloodline pure and prevent property from being divided with outsiders. Old John always said Whitaker blood was pure blood and mixing with others was a sin. Records from the Raleigh County Social Services Department, obtained via public records requests, show that between 1960 and 2000, at least 23 Whitaker children had the same father listed on the birth certificates as the mother's own father or brother. The legal system simply overlooked these irregularities, treating the family as a hopeless case. If this story weighs on you, comment below. How does a society allow this to go on for so many generations? The current Whitakers never received formal education. Ray, Lorraine, Timmy, and Freddie never went to school. They can't read, write, or do basic math. Their only understanding of the world comes from conversations with equally isolated and uninformed relatives. To them, their condition is normal, it's all they've ever known. Tragically, the cycle continues. Freddie, despite his cognitive limits, has had at least 2 relationships with first-degree cousins. One produced a child who died at 3 months old from severe heart defects. The other ended in a 5th-month miscarriage. Dr. Robin Bennett, a genetic counselor at the University of Washington, explains that when the inbreeding coefficient reaches levels like the Whitakers, the chance of severe birth defects exceeds 50%. It is statistically more likely that a child will be born with major problems than born healthy. The family survives on government disability benefits, about $800 a month, which barely covers basic needs. They depend on neighbors for food and clothes. Once a month, a church van brings basics: canned beans, rice, old bread, and milk. The nearest clinic is 45 kilometers away, and the Whitakers have no way to get there. They have no social life, no forms of entertainment besides sitting on the porch watching the occasional car pass on the dirt road. Their existence is silent and without future. My first reaction was pure shock, Leiter admits. But then it hit me, how could a family in such extreme conditions remain invisible to authorities for so long? The road to their home isn't even a real road, it's a path worn down by decades of use by one family. When I finally saw the house, I felt like I was on the set of a horror movie. The photographer says he struggled at first to process that he was looking at human beings. Ray was sitting on the porch, and honestly, my first thought was that he was some kind of haunted doll or sculpture. When he moved and made sounds, I realized I was seeing something I never imagined could exist. Leiter tried to communicate but quickly understood the family's severe limitations. Freddie was the only one who could form recognizable words, but even his answers were limited to yes, no, and a few simple words. I asked how old he was, and he said, many. I asked where he was born, and he pointed at the ground. The situation reveals deep systemic failures. Raleigh County, where the Whitakers live, is one of the poorest and most neglected parts of Western Virginia. With just 78,000 people spread across 600 square kilometers, social services are scarce and overwhelmed. Internal documents from the Department of Social Services, obtained through Freedom of Information requests, show that local authorities knew about the Whitakers for decades but chose to ignore them. This wasn't ignorance, it was a conscious political decision to treat the family as a problem that didn't exist. The documents include at least 8 social worker reports between 1985 and 2005 describing subhuman conditions at the Whitaker property. Each report recommended immediate intervention, and each was filed away without action by supervisors who considered the situation unsolvable. Morrison, a social worker who spent 15 years in the region, explains, "There are hundreds of isolated families in these mountains living in terrible conditions. Resources are limited, and cases like the Whitakers require expert intervention that poor rural counties just don't have." The education system failed the family completely. Records from the West Virginia Department of Education show that in the 1980s, truancy officers tried to get the children into school. Every attempt failed due to family resistance and the children's physical and mental state. The kids came in smelling bad, unable to communicate. Other children were scared, and teachers weren't trained to handle such severe disabilities, one report noted. The neglect wasn't only educational. Local newspaper the Charleston Gazette-Mail reported in 1995 and 2003 on investigations by social services into the Whitakers' living conditions. Both probes ended with reports that were filed without action. The 1995 report described subhuman living conditions, lack of basic sanitation, signs of medical neglect, and possible sexual abuse. The Whitakers reveal the hypocrisy of a society that celebrates family values but abandons families that don't fit the norm. The local community has an uneasy relationship with them. Some neighbors show compassion, bringing food and clothing sometimes. Others see them as a shameful secret that should be hidden. Many see the family's condition as a divine curse or punishment for ancestral sin. This fatalistic attitude blocked outside intervention for decades. The Whitakers weren't just forgotten, they were actively ignored by a community that preferred they remain invisible. The story of the Whitakers goes beyond the shock of extreme inbreeding. It's about American rural poverty, institutional neglect, failures in health and education, and the systematic abandonment of marginalized people. Later genetic studies have shown the Whitakers are not alone in Appalachia. What makes the Whitakers unique isn't the inbreeding itself, it's how long it went on and the total lack of outside intervention, says Dr. Bamshad. They are a natural experiment on the limits of human survival under genetic adversity. But the attention has also turned the Whitakers into a kind of human zoo. Morbid tourists sometimes show up to take pictures and videos as if they were animals. This raises tough ethical questions about consent and dignity. Media attention has brought some small improvements. Viewer donations have funded minor home repairs, a generator for electricity, a working bathroom, and better medical access. Still, the brothers' health is declining. Ray is almost 70, Lorraine is 65 and has worsening breathing problems. They are the last of their line, says Dr. Martinez. A family that has bred itself to the edge of extinction. But the Whitakers also serve as a warning. In poor rural areas across America, thousands of families live in conditions of deep social, educational, and medical vulnerability. Geographic isolation mixed with poverty and official neglect allows tragedies like this to unfold in silence. Dr. Williams, a social anthropologist at the University of Virginia who has studied isolated Appalachian communities for 20 years, notes that the Whitakers are not an anomaly. They are the extreme result of social trends affecting thousands of families here. Multidimensional poverty, cultural isolation, and government abandonment create ecosystems where human tragedies like this perpetuate across generations. Williams has documented at least 47 other families in Appalachia with significant histories of inbreeding, though none as extreme as the Whitakers. What we see is a spectrum of vulnerability, she explains. The Whitakers are the farthest point on that spectrum. Other families, like the Fugates, known for blue skin due to inbreeding, or the Hartwells, with hereditary dwarfism and cognitive disabilities, show that the Whitakers aren't alone. They are simply the most extreme example of a pattern of isolation and inbreeding in the region. Research led by the Appalachian Health Initiative reveals that in some isolated mountain communities, consanguinity rates are 15 to 20 times higher than the national average. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who heads the initiative, states, "We're facing a public health crisis that's been ignored for decades. The Whitakers represent the most severe outcome of what happens when geographic isolation meets economic desperation and social abandonment. The real lesson of the Whitaker family isn't in their deformed genes, it's in what their existence says about the failures of a society that won't protect its most vulnerable. They are a mirror that reflects not just physical deformities, but moral and social ones. Dr. Bennett offers a grim final thought. From a purely scientific view, the Whitakers show what happens when natural selection is artificially suspended. In nature, individuals with this many genetic flaws wouldn't survive to reproductive age. What kept this family alive wasn't their genes, it was modern support systems. But that persistence came at an immense human cost. Every day for the Whitaker siblings is a struggle against limitations no person should face. Their lives are both a testament to human resilience and a devastating indictment of a society that allows such suffering to continue. Right now, as you watch this story in comfort, with access to education, healthcare, and opportunity, the Whitaker brothers and sister remain in their dark home, without power, without hope, without a future. They are ghosts of an America we pretend doesn't exist, hidden in the forgotten corners of a country that boasts opportunity for all. The Whitaker family will die in silence, as they lived. But their story remains as a permanent testimony to what happens when a society decides some lives aren't worth saving. They are the human cost of institutionalized neglect, the genetic price of social abandonment, and living proof that some tragedies are entirely preventable if we only care enough to prevent them. Their lives ask a direct question of our collective conscience. If a society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable, what does the existence of the Whitaker family say about who we really are? If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because stories like this reveal truths few have the courage to tell. If you've made it this far, it means this story moved you. Leave a comment with "watched here" so I can get to know who really follows the channel. Like this video if it impacted you in any way. Share it so more people understand the realities our society prefers to ignore.